3 days after the failed assault, Commander Veltar stood in the medical bay of his flagship, staring at his reflection in the polished metal wall. His armor had been repaired, but the cracks in his confidence ran much deeper than any physical damage. The creature he had dismissed as a pet had done something no enemy had accomplished in 50 years of warfare. It had made him question everything he thought he knew about combat. Sub-Commander Krickstall approached carefully, carrying a datapad with casualty reports that made for grim reading. The ground assault had cost them over half their forces, with entire units simply disappearing into the forests and plains of the human world. Most shocking of all, they had captured no prisoners and gained no territory. "The tactical analysis is complete, Commander," Krickstall said quietly. "The humans used our own communication systems against us, turning our coordination into chaos. The creature that attacked your command vehicle somehow learned our protocols and frequencies within minutes." Veltar nodded slowly, his 4 eyes still focused on his reflection. "And our current status? We have sufficient forces to maintain orbital superiority, but any further ground operations would be inadvisable." It was the closest thing to admitting defeat that Zephyrian military doctrine allowed. Veltar had conquered 47 worlds, but this small planet with its 5,000 inhabitants had stopped his advance cold. "Sir," Krickstall continued hesitantly, "the humans are requesting communication." Veltar turned away from the mirror, his expression unreadable. "The pets want to talk? Captain Morrison has asked for a face-to-face meeting. He suggests neutral ground at the site of the destroyed mining station." For a moment, Veltar considered refusing. His pride demanded that he either complete the conquest or withdraw entirely. But something about the way the humans fought had awakened a curiosity he had not felt in decades. These creatures had displayed tactics and courage that deserved respect, even from an enemy. "Very well," Veltar said finally. "Arrange the meeting." The ruins of Mining Station Alpha told the story of the battle more clearly than any military report. Twisted metal and scorched earth marked the places where Zephyrian technology had met human determination. Trees lay fallen across what had once been clear paths, their massive trunks still embedded with alien armor fragments. Captain Morrison arrived at the meeting site with only 2 companions, Sergeant Torres and Staff Sergeant Rivers. The choice was deliberate, showing both his military strength and his confidence. Torres represented their tactical success, while Rivers had become a legend among both species for his impossible assault on the command vehicle. Veltar came with only Sub-Commander Krickstall, a decision that surprised his own officers. By Zephyrian tradition, a commander meeting with inferior species should bring an impressive escort to demonstrate power and authority. But Veltar was no longer certain who was inferior in this situation. The 2 groups met in the center of the ruined facility, surrounded by evidence of the battle that had changed everything. Morrison stepped forward first, his bearing calm and professional, despite facing creatures that could have crushed him with their bare hands. "Commander Veltar," Morrison said with a slight nod of acknowledgement, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Veltar studied the human captain with new eyes, seeing details he had missed during their earlier communications. Morrison moved with quiet confidence, his posture suggesting someone accustomed to making difficult decisions under pressure. There was intelligence in his eyes, and something else that Veltar was only beginning to recognize: the absolute refusal to submit that defined the human species. "Captain Morrison," Veltar replied, his translator working properly again. "You wished to discuss terms?" "I wanted to discuss understanding," Morrison corrected. Your forces attacked us because you believed we were inferior creatures that needed to be caged and protected. Our forces fought back because we believe freedom is worth dying for." Sergeant Torres remained silent, but his presence spoke volumes. The human soldier stood relaxed but alert, ready for violence if necessary, but not seeking it. His eyes never stopped moving, constantly assessing threats and opportunities with the instincts of a natural predator. But it was Alex Rivers who drew most of Veltar's attention. The human who had single-handedly destroyed a Zephyrian command. Vehicle stood quietly beside his captain, showing no signs of pride or aggression. He looked like an ordinary man, unremarkable in every way except for the steady confidence in his eyes. "You called us pets," Rivers said suddenly, his voice carrying across the ruins. "You saw soft creatures who needed protection and guidance." Veltar nodded slowly, remembering his earlier words with something approaching shame. "I did." "We're not your pets, Commander," Morrison continued. "We're not anyone's pets. We're humans, and humans don't kneel." The simple statement carried more weight than any threat or boast. Veltar had conquered species that possessed superior technology, greater numbers, and more combat experience than these colonists. But none of them had possessed the fundamental characteristic that defined humanity: the absolute refusal to accept subjugation. "I have studied your tactics," Veltar said after a long pause. "Your use of terrain, improvised weapons, and psychological warfare was impressive." "We fight with what we have," Torres replied, "and we fight to win." "Even against impossible odds?" "Especially against impossible odds," Rivers answered. "That's when it matters most." Veltar looked around at the destroyed mining station, seeing it not as evidence of human savagery, but as proof of their ingenuity and determination. They had taken mining equipment and farming tools and turned them into weapons that could stop a galactic empire. They had used their knowledge of local terrain to neutralize superior technology. Most importantly, they had refused to be intimidated by forces beyond their understanding. "What would you have done if you had won?" Veltar asked Morrison. "If you had captured me and my forces?" Morrison considered the question seriously. "We would have demanded that you leave our world and never return. Beyond that, we probably would have tried to learn from you. Your technology, your knowledge of other species, your understanding of the galaxy. You would not have sought revenge, demanded tribute. Why would we want to become like the thing we fought against?" Morrison replied. "We don't want to conquer other worlds, Commander. We just want to be left alone to build our own lives." The conversation continued for over an hour, with both sides sharing their perspectives on the conflict and its implications. Veltar found himself genuinely curious about human society, their history, and their motivations. These creatures had achieved spaceflight and interstellar colonization without conquering other species, something that seemed impossible to the Zephyrian mindset. As the meeting drew to a close, Veltar made a decision that would be debated in Zephyrian military academies for generations to come. "Captain Morrison," he said formally, "I am withdrawing my forces from this system. Your people have earned the right to determine their own fate." Morrison nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Commander. Perhaps our species can meet again under better circumstances." "Perhaps," Veltar replied, "but I suspect that when we do, it will be as equals rather than as conqueror and conquered." As the Zephyrian fleet prepared to leave orbit, Veltar made his final log entry about the human encounter. His words would become required reading for future generations of alien commanders who might underestimate species based on their appearance or technology level. Personal note: the creatures who call themselves humans are decidedly not pets. They are something far more dangerous and far more interesting than any species we have previously encountered. They possess a quality that cannot be measured by weapons or technology, the absolute refusal to surrender their freedom. We shall meet again, but when we do, it will be as equals. Back on the surface, the colonists watched the alien ships disappear among the stars. They had won more than a battle. They had announced humanity's presence to the galaxy in a way that would never be forgotten. The children who had hidden in shelters during the fighting now played in gardens protected by newly constructed defense satellites, while their parents worked to rebuild what had been damaged. Captain Morrison stood in the command center of the New Hope, looking out at the growing settlement that stretched beyond the original colony boundaries. The encounter with the Zephyrians had changed them, forcing rapid technological advancement and military organization that would serve them well in future encounters with other species. Lieutenant Amy Carter worked at her communications console, monitoring deep space frequencies for any sign of returning threats. Dr. Lisa Park had been promoted to head of planetary defense, her chemical weapons proving so effective that other human colonies were requesting her expertise. Sergeant Torres trained new volunteers in the guerrilla tactics that had saved their world, and Staff Sergeant Alex Rivers returned to his normal duties as if nothing extraordinary had happened, though his impossible assault on the Zephyrian command vehicle had already entered human military legend. The galaxy was vast and filled with species that might see humanity as prey. But the Battle of Kepler 442b had established an important principle. Humans were not victims waiting to be rescued, or pets waiting to be collected. They were a speck. Commander Veltar refused to believe what his sensors were telling him. His elite ground forces, warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds, were being systematically destroyed by creatures he had dismissed as pets. The tactical display showed red warning lights across all landing zones indicating casualties and equipment losses that should have been impossible. "This cannot be accurate," Veltar growled at his bridge crew. "Run full diagnostics on all sensors immediately." Sub-Commander Krikstal approached cautiously, knowing his commander's temper when faced with unexpected setbacks. "Sir, I have confirmed the data through multiple systems. Our ground forces have sustained 70% casualties in the past 6 hours. Veltar's 4 arms moved restlessly as he paced the bridge, his chitinous armor reflecting the red warning lights from the tactical displays. In over 50 years of military service, he had never encountered resistance like this from such a primitive species. "The pets are using guerrilla tactics," he snarled. "They hide like cowards instead of facing us in honorable combat." "Perhaps, Commander, but they are winning," Krikstal replied carefully. The observation stung because it was true. Veltar had expected this operation to be completed within hours, with minimal casualties and maximum psychological impact on other species who might consider resistance. Instead, his forces were being picked apart by an enemy that refused to fight according to established military doctrine. "Prepare for full orbital bombardment," Veltar commanded. "We will demonstrate proper military force." "Sir, that will destroy the pets as well. Our orders were to capture them alive for the Imperial menageries." Veltar paused, considering his options. The Empire valued living specimens more than dead planets, but his reputation could not survive this humiliation. "Then we will show them what real warfare looks like. Deploy all remaining ground forces, along with air support and heavy armor. I want the main colony crushed within the hour." Down on the surface, Captain Morrison watched the alien reinforcements descending from orbit through the command center's main screen. Dozens of transport ships filled the sky, accompanied by sleek fighter craft and massive hover tanks that bristled with energy weapons. "They're bringing everything they have," Lieutenant Amy Carter reported from her communications station. "Our scouts report at least 500 fresh troops, plus armored vehicles and air support." Dr. Lisa Park looked up from her chemistry equipment, her face streaked with sweat and chemical stains. "We've used most of our explosive materials in the forest ambushes. I can make more, but it will take time we don't have." Morrison nodded grimly. The guerrilla tactics had worked better than anyone hoped. But now the aliens were responding with overwhelming force. The colonists had proven they could fight. But could they survive a full military assault? "Where's Torres?" Morrison asked. "Still in the field with his strike teams," Amy replied. "They're trying to slow down the enemy advance, but—" Her words were cut off by the thunderous roar of alien aircraft passing overhead. Through the windows, they could see the strange fighter craft circling the colony like predators preparing to strike. 3 kilometers outside the main settlement, Staff Sergeant Alex Rivers crouched behind a burned-out mining vehicle, watching the alien ground forces advance across the open plains. Rivers was a man who had seen combat before, serving in the corporate wars that had ravaged the outer colonies before humanity unified under a single government. At 32 years old, Rivers had the lean build of a professional soldier and the calm confidence that came from surviving situations where others had died. His dark hair was cut short in military fashion, and his eyes held the steady focus of someone who had learned to find opportunity in the middle of chaos. The alien formation was impressive, he had to admit. Hover tanks the size of buildings floated. Across the terrain, their energy weapons charging with visible power. Infantry in powered armor marched alongside them in perfect formation, while air support provided cover from above. It was exactly the kind of overwhelming display of force that had broken resistance on dozens of other worlds. But Alex Rivers was not like the other species the Zephyrians had conquered. Rivers spoke quietly into his radio, contacting the few volunteers who had stayed with him when the retreat order was given. "All units, this is Alpha 6, target confirmed. Beginning approach." "Alex, you crazy bastard," came Sergeant Torres's voice through the static. "That's suicide. Fall back to the secondary positions." "Negative, Sergeant. Someone needs to buy the colony time to prepare their defenses. Might as well be me." Rivers checked his equipment one final time. His rifle carried armor-piercing rounds that Dr. Park had modified with her chemical compounds. His belt held shaped charges designed to penetrate alien armor. Most importantly, he carried the small device that Amy Carter had built using parts from their communication systems. The device could intercept and decode Zephyrian communication frequencies, allowing him to understand their tactical coordination. More importantly, it could be used to send false commands if he could get close enough to their command vehicle. What Rivers planned to do next would have been considered impossible by any reasonable military analysis. But Alex Rivers had never been particularly reasonable when it came to protecting the people he cared about. The Zephyrian command vehicle was a massive hover tank that served as the mobile headquarters for the ground assault. Commander Veltar had transferred his personal flag to the vehicle to oversee the final attack personally. He stood in the command compartment surrounded by tactical displays and communication equipment, directing his forces with the precision of a chess master. "Air units, begin bombardment of the outer defenses. Veltar commanded. "Ground forces advance in formation. The pets have shown they can hide in forests, but they cannot hide in open ground." The attack began exactly as Veltar had planned. His fighters strafed the human defensive positions, while his tanks provided covering fire for advancing infantry. The colonists' return fire was pathetic compared to Zephyrian technology, their primitive weapons barely scratching his force's armor. For 20 minutes, everything proceeded according to tactical doctrine. Then Alex Rivers appeared. The human soldier seemed to materialize out of empty ground 400 meters from the command vehicle. Veltar watched through his external cameras as the tiny figure sprinted across the open terrain, somehow avoiding the concentrated fire of dozens of weapons. "What is that creature doing?" Veltar demanded. "All units, concentrate fire on the running pet." But Rivers moved like nothing the Zephyrians had ever encountered. He rolled under energy blasts, leaped over obstacles that should have stopped him, and used the aliens' own destroyed equipment as cover. His movements seemed to anticipate their targeting systems, as if he could predict where their weapons would fire. "He's heading directly for us, Commander," reported the vehicle's gunner. "Should I use the main cannon?" "No, you fool. At this range, you might damage our own forces. Use the point defense systems." The command vehicle's smaller weapons tracked Rivers as he closed the distance, but somehow he stayed ahead of their targeting computers. Energy bolts scorched the ground where he had been milliseconds before, while he continued his impossible advance. 200 meters, 150. Then Alex Rivers did something that would be remembered in both human and Zephyrian military history for centuries to come. He leaped onto the command vehicle's hull while it was moving, planted shaped charges on its sensor arrays to blind it, and began working his way toward the crew compartment. Inside the vehicle, chaos erupted as their external sensors went dark, and their communication systems started receiving conflicting signals. Rivers was using Amy Carter's device to intercept their frequencies and send false orders to other units in the area. "Guard Unit 7. Fall back to defensive positions," Rivers transmitted in perfectly translated Zephyrian. "Command vehicle, under attack by superior human forces. Air support, target our own position," he sent to the fighter aircraft. "Friendly fire authorized." Veltar watched in horror as his carefully coordinated assault began to collapse into confusion. Units were receiving contradictory orders. Air support was attacking ground forces, and somehow a single human had turned his advanced technology against itself. The hull began to buckle as Rivers used his remaining explosives to tear through. The morning sun cast long shadows through the forests of Kepler 442b as Commander Veltar began what he considered a gentle collection operation. From his command ship, he watched the first wave of Zephyrian troops descend toward the planet in their armored transports. The landing sites had been chosen carefully to surround the human settlements and cut off any escape routes. Veltar leaned back in his command chair, expecting this to be over within hours. His forces were the finest warriors in the galaxy, equipped with energy weapons, powered armor, and centuries of combat experience. The humans below had nothing that could threaten them. "First wave has landed successfully, Commander," reported his communications officer. "No resistance encountered at any of the landing zones." "Excellent," Veltar replied, watching the tactical display as his troops formed up on the planet's surface. "Begin the sweep toward the main settlement. Remind the unit commanders that we want the pets captured alive and unharmed." Sub-Commander Crixtall approached from the tactical station, his 4 arms working efficiently at multiple control panels. "Commander Thakron reports his ground forces are advancing through the forest sector." He expects to reach the human mining station within the hour. Down on the surface, Commander Thakron led his patrol through the dense woodland that separated the landing zone from Mining Station Alpha. Like all Zephyrian warriors, he stood nearly 9 feet tall in his powered armor, each step causing small tremors in the ground beneath his feet. Behind him marched 20 elite soldiers, their energy weapons charged and ready for any threat. The forest was quiet except for the sounds of their movement. No birds sang in the trees, no small animals rustled in the underbrush. Thakron assumed. The local wildlife had fled from the approaching warriors, which was exactly what he expected from primitive creatures. "Stay alert," he commanded his troops through their helmet communicators. "The pets may try to hide or run when they see us coming." Hidden 30 meters above the ground, Sergeant Dan Torres watched the alien patrol through his rifle scope. He had been waiting in this position for 6 hours, camouflaged among the thick branches of a tree that the colonists called an iron oak. The massive trunk could support several tons of weight, making it perfect for concealing defensive positions. Torres spoke quietly into his radio headset, using the short-range communications network that Dr. Park had helped him establish throughout the forest. "All units, this is Alpha Leader. Primary target is approaching your positions. Remember, wait for my signal." Throughout the forest, 19 other colonists acknowledged his transmission. They were farmers, mechanics, scientists, and teachers, who had volunteered to fight for their freedom. Most had never held a weapon before arriving on this world, but Torres had trained them well in the past day and night. Private Kelly Brooks crouched in her concealed foxhole 50 meters ahead of the alien patrol. At barely 5 feet tall and weighing less than 100 pounds, she looked like a child compared to the massive warriors approaching her position. But appearances could be deceiving. Kelly had grown up on a farming station in the asteroid belt, where a single mistake with mining equipment could kill an entire family. She understood machinery, explosives, and the importance of patience when dealing with dangerous situations. Her small size had always made people underestimate her, and she had learned to use that to her advantage. The lead alien was now 10 meters from her position. Kelly could see the details of his armor through the scope of her rifle, noting the weak points that Torres had identified during their planning sessions. The joints where the armor plates connected, the sensor clusters around the helmet, the power pack on the back that fed energy to the suit's systems. Commander Thakron paused directly above Kelly's hiding place, scanning the forest ahead for any sign of human activity. His sensors showed no movement, no heat signatures, no electromagnetic emissions. The area appeared completely empty. "Sector clear," he reported to his troops. "Continue advance." That was when Sergeant Torres gave the signal that changed everything. The forest exploded into chaos as hidden charges detonated throughout the area. Trees that had been rigged with Dr. Park's improvised explosives toppled across the alien formation, their massive trunks crushing several warriors beneath tons of wood and metal. The ground erupted as buried mines tore holes in the earth, sending dirt and debris flying in all directions. But the explosions were just the beginning. Kelly Brooks emerged from her concealed position like a deadly ghost, her rifle already aimed at the confused alien commander. Her first shot struck Thakron's primary sensor cluster, blinding his helmet's targeting system. Her second shot hit the power coupling on his left arm, causing that limb to go limp. Her third shot found the weak joint at his knee, dropping the massive warrior to the ground. All around the forest, similar scenes played out as the colonists put their desperate plan into action. Corporal Mike Johnson, a former asteroid miner, used fiber cables to tangle the aliens' forearms before detonating charges he had positioned throughout the trees. The warriors' own strength worked against them as they pulled the cables tight, triggering hidden explosives. Dr. Park's chemical weapons proved devastatingly effective. The mining compounds she had developed created clouds of caustic gas that ate through the aliens' armor seals, forcing them to rely on their suits' limited internal air supplies. Other devices released electromagnetic pulses that interfered with their sophisticated equipment. What shocked the Zephyrians most was not the ambush itself, but the humans' savage efficiency. These creatures they had dismissed as pets fought with a coordination and ruthlessness that none of Veltar's forces had encountered before. Amy Carter coordinated the attack from a hidden command post, using her communication skills to direct the colonists' movements like pieces on a chessboard. Her calm voice guided Private Kelly Brooks to her next target, warned Corporal Johnson about enemy reinforcements, and helped other fighters escape when their positions were compromised. "Target down," Kelly reported after finishing off the wounded alien commander. "Moving to secondary position." "Confirmed," Amy replied. "Mike, you have 3 hostiles approaching from your 6 o'clock. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Zephyrians had experienced in their centuries of conquest. The humans didn't stand and fight like traditional warriors. They struck from hiding, killed efficiently, and disappeared back into the forest before the aliens could respond. Commander Thakron, wounded but still alive, managed to activate his emergency communicator. His transmission reached Veltar's command ship as he lay trapped beneath a fallen tree, his armor systems failing one by one. "Commander," Thakron's voice was filled with pain and confusion. "The pets. They're not what we expected. They fight, like nothing we've encountered before." Veltar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His elite unit's life signs were disappearing one by one, eliminated by creatures he had compared to children's toys. The neat formation markers that had showed his troops advancing confidently through the forest were now scattered red dots indicating casualties. "Impossible," Veltar muttered. "Send reinforcements immediately." "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving distress signals from 3 other landing sites. The humans appear to be attacking all our ground forces simultaneously." On the planet below, Sergeant Torres moved through the forest like a predator in his natural element. His military experience from the Mars Rebellion had taught him that superior technology meant nothing if you could control the battlefield. The aliens had better weapons and armor, but they were fighting on human terms now. Torres found Commander Thakron pinned under the massive tree trunk, his alien features visible through his cracked helmet visor. The Zephyrian warrior looked up at him with something that might have been fear. "You're going to die on this world," Torres said quietly, raising his rifle. "But first you're going to send a message to your commander." He activated the alien's communicator and forced Thakron to speak. "Commander Veltar," the wounded warrior gasped. "The humans are not pets. They are predators. We underestimated them completely." Torres ended the transmission with a single shot, then melted back into the forest to rejoin his fighters. Above them in orbit, Commander Veltar stared at the silent communication panel, his 4 hands clenched into fists. For the first time in his military career, he was facing an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. The creatures he had called cute pets had just taught him that there were different kinds of intelligence in the universe, and some of them were far more dangerous than others. As reports continued to flood in from his scattered ground forces, Veltar began to realize that he might have made the biggest mistake of his career. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning. Commander Veltar stood in the observation deck of his ship, watching the human colony through the powerful sensors that could see through clouds and darkness. The tiny figures moving below looked even more pathetic from this distance, scurrying around their primitive settlements like insects disturbed from their nest. Sub-Commander Crixtall joined him at the viewing wall, carrying a datapad filled with information about the creatures below. The intelligence reports painted a picture of a species barely worthy of notice, let alone concern. "Their response is quite amusing, Commander," Crixtall said, his mandibles clicking in what passed for Zephyrian laughter. "They appear to be attempting some form of military preparation." Veltar examined the sensor readings with the detached interest of a scientist studying lab specimens. The humans were indeed moving with more purpose now, gathering their few weapons and constructing what looked like defensive positions. It was like watching children play at war with toy soldiers. "Look at these readings," Veltar pointed to the display. "Their most powerful weapons fire small metal projectiles using chemical explosives. The velocity is barely sufficient to penetrate light armor and completely useless against our shield technology." The two Zephyrians watched as the humans worked, frantically to prepare their defenses. Groups of colonists hauled equipment from building to building, while others dug shallow trenches around the main settlement. Their movement seemed chaotic and uncoordinated compared to the precise military efficiency the Zephyrians were accustomed to. "Their leader appears to be that Morrison creature," Crixtall observed. "Intelligence shows he has some experience with space travel and colony management, but no significant military background." Veltar nodded, studying the human captain as he moved between groups of workers. Morrison looked tired and stressed, exactly what Veltar expected from a creature faced with forces beyond its comprehension. "What about their numbers?" Veltar asked. "Approximately 5,000 total, with fewer than 200 having any form of combat training. Most are scientists, engineers, farmers, and other civilian occupations. They have no warships, no orbital defenses, and no allies. Down. On the planet's surface, the reality was indeed desperate, but not in the way the aliens imagined. In the command center, Captain Morrison stood around a table covered with maps and equipment lists, surrounded by the few people who would determine humanity's fate on this world. Dr. Lisa Park was a woman in her 30s with dark hair and intense brown eyes that reflected her brilliant mind. As the colony's chief scientist, she understood their technology better than anyone. Her specialty was mining and industrial chemistry, knowledge that was about to become far more important than anyone had expected. Sergeant Dan Torres represented their entire military force. He was a compact man with graying hair and scars that told stories of battles fought long before they came to this world. His experience came from the Mars Rebellion 15 years earlier, where human colonists had fought against corporate security forces in the asteroid mining stations. "We have exactly 187 people with military training," Torres reported, his voice calm despite their impossible situation. "Most of that training is basic colonial defense, not real combat experience." Morrison studied the numbers on his tablet, each figure representing colonists who would soon face an enemy beyond anything they had prepared for. "What about weapons?" "Standard colony defense package. Assault rifles, some heavy machine guns, a few rocket launchers designed for clearing rock slides and dangerous wildlife. Nothing that would threaten a starship." Dr. Park leaned forward over the maps, her mind already working on solutions that others might not see. We're thinking about this wrong. We can't fight them ship to ship or match their advanced weapons. But we have advantages they don't know about. Such as? Morrison asked. This planet, for one thing. We've been here 3 years. We know every cave system, every forest path, every mine shaft. The mineral composition here is unique, too. Some of these compounds could be incredibly dangerous if mixed properly. Torres looked interested. Explosives? Better than explosives. The sulfur compounds in the eastern mines, when combined with certain metallic elements we extract, create reactions that are far more powerful than conventional chemical explosives. I've been avoiding those combinations because they're so unstable. But now, Morrison felt the first spark of hope since the aliens had arrived. How much can you produce? With our mining equipment and the chemistry lab, we could create enough to level small mountains. The problem is delivery and timing. Torres was already thinking tactically. Guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run attacks, make them come to us on ground. We control. Above them in orbit, Veltar continued his observations with growing amusement. The human preparations were so primitive that he found himself almost feeling sorry for them. Their weapons looked like museum pieces compared to Zephyrian technology, and their defensive positions would crumble under the first bombardment. "Shall I prepare the collection teams, Commander?" Krixtal asked. "Not yet. I want to observe them a bit longer. Their behavior is quite fascinating from an anthropological perspective." Veltar activated the communication system and opened a channel to the planet below. He wanted to see how the creatures reacted to a bit more pressure. The main screen in the Human Command Center flickered to life, showing Commander Veltar's imposing form once again. Several colonists who had gathered to help with planning stepped backward instinctively. "Greetings again, little ones." Veltar's translated voice filled the room. "I see you have been quite busy since our last conversation. Your attempts at military preparation are most entertaining." Morrison stepped forward, determined not to show the fear he felt. "We're prepared to defend ourselves, Commander. Perhaps you should reconsider your plans." Veltar's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Defend yourselves? With what? Those tiny projectile weapons? Your primitive explosives?" He gestured dismissively with one of his 4 arms. "My personal guards carry better equipment than your entire arsenal." Dr. Park moved closer to the screen, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. She studied the alien commander's armor and equipment, looking for any weakness or flaw she could exploit. "You study me like a specimen, little creature." Veltar noticed her attention. "How delightfully curious you are. Like a pet examining. It's master." Amy Carter's hands clenched at her console as she translated the alien's words. The condescending tone was becoming unbearable, but she forced herself to remain professional. "We are not your pets," Morrison said firmly. "We are intelligent beings capable of making our own decisions." "Intelligence is relative, Captain Morrison," Veltar replied. "A trained animal can perform complex tasks, but that does not make it the equal of its trainer. You have learned to use fire and simple tools, but you are still far from true civilization." Torres had heard enough. He stepped forward, his military bearing evident despite the impossible odds they faced. "Commander, you're making a mistake if you think we'll submit without a fight." Veltar focused his attention on the sergeant, studying him with the interest a hunter might show for slightly larger prey. "Ah, the soldier speaks. Tell me, warrior, how many battles have you fought? How many worlds have you conquered?" "Enough to know that underestimating your enemy is the first step toward defeat," Torres replied steadily. Underestimating? Veltar's amusement was evident even through the translation. Little creature, I have conquered 47 worlds. My fleet has destroyed entire civilizations that possess technology centuries ahead of yours. You are not my enemy. You are not even a challenge. You are simply there. The communication ended abruptly, leaving the command center in heavy silence. Morrison looked around at his people, seeing determination beginning to replace fear in their faces. Dr. Park was the first to speak. He's right about one thing. We can't match their technology or experience, but he's wrong about something more important. What's that? Morrison asked. He thinks we're just trained animals. He has no idea what humans are really capable of when we're fighting for our freedom. Torres nodded grimly. Every species he's conquered probably tried to meet his forces in open battle, matching strength against strength. They lost because they played by his rules. So we don't play by his rules, Morrison concluded. We make our own. As night fell over the colony, the humans continued their preparations with renewed purpose. They might be outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the aliens didn't understand. They had the desperate courage of a species that refused to be caged, and the dangerous creativity of minds that saw opportunity where others saw only obstacles. High above them, Commander Veltar settled into his command chair for the night, confident that tomorrow would bring an easy victory and another species to add to the Zephyrian collection. He had no way of knowing that he was about to learn a lesson that would change everything he thought he understood about the small, soft creatures he called pets. The massive alien ship hung in the darkness of space like a twisted metal mountain. Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of the Crimson Talon, his four arms crossed behind his back as he watched the small blue and green planet spin slowly below. His dark eyes studied the readings on the main screen, while his officers worked quietly at their stations around him. Veltar was tall even for a Zephyrian, standing nearly 10 feet high with thick chitinous armor covering his body like natural plating. His species had ruled the stars for over 2,000 years, conquering world after world with their superior technology and warrior culture. This small planet called Kepler 442b would be just another easy victory to add to their collection. The planet looked peaceful from orbit. Veltar could see the settlements scattered across the northern continent, tiny dots of light against the green forests and brown plains. The readings showed only 5,000 inhabitants, far fewer than most worlds the Zephyrians had conquered. Their technology appeared primitive, barely capable of spaceflight within their own solar system. Sub-Commander Crixtal approached from the sensor station, his heavy footsteps echoing on the metal deck. Like all Zephyrians, he moved with the careful grace of a predator, each step calculated and precise. His armor gleamed under the bridge lights as he stopped beside his commander. "The scans are complete, Commander," Crixtal said in their native language, his voice carrying the typical Zephyrian growl. "The creatures below call themselves humans. They arrived on this world only 3 years ago from their home planet in a nearby system." Veltar nodded slowly, still watching the planet. "What do we know about their capabilities?" "Very limited." "Sir, they have converted one of their transport ships into a command center. Their weapons are basic projectile systems, nothing that could threaten our shields. Their population consists mostly of civilians engaged in mining and agriculture." A slight smile crossed Veltar's face, though it would have looked more like a snarl to human eyes. "How disappointing. I was hoping for at least some challenge after our long journey." Down on the planet's surface, Captain Jake Morrison stood in the command center of what had once been the colony ship New Hope. The ship had been grounded permanently when they arrived, its engines and life support systems converted to power, the growing settlement. Now it served as the heart of their small civilization, housing the communication arrays, computers, and government offices. Morrison was a man in his early 40s with short brown hair that was already showing gray at the temples. He had led the colonists through the dangerous journey from Earth and the difficult early years of establishing their new home. His steady leadership had helped them survive crop failures, equipment breakdowns, and the countless challenges of building a society from nothing. The main screen in the command center showed the alien ship hanging in orbit above them. It was enormous, easily 10 times larger than their own vessel had been. Strange protrusions and weapon ports covered its hull like thorns on a deadly flower. Morrison had seen nothing like it in all his years of space travel. Lieutenant Amy Carter worked frantically at the communications console nearby. She was young, barely 25, with blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls as she tried to establish contact with the alien vessel. The colonists depended on her skills to bridge the gap between two completely different species. "Any luck with the translation protocols?" Morrison asked, walking over to stand behind her chair. Amy shook her head in frustration. "Their language is completely unlike anything in our databases. The computer is trying to find patterns, but it could take hours to establish basic communication." Before Morrison could reply, the main screen flickered and changed. The image of a space was replaced by the interior of the alien ship, showing a creature that made several colonists step backward in shock. Commander Veltar filled most of the screen, his massive form and armored appearance making him look like something from a nightmare. The alien spoke in his own language, the sounds harsh and guttural to human ears. After a moment, the translation system began working, converting his words into English with a slight delay. "Greetings, small creatures." Veltar's translated voice filled the command center. "I am Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire. You are now within our territory and subject to our authority." Morrison stepped forward, trying to project calm confidence, despite the fear he felt looking at the alien commander. "I am Captain Jake Morrison, leader of this colony. We come in peace and wish to establish friendly relations with your people." Veltar's laugh was a sound like grinding metal that made everyone in the command center wince. "How adorable! The little pink creature thinks it can negotiate." He turned to speak with someone off-screen, his voice still being translated. "Look at them, Crixtal. These soft, weak beings remind me of the grooming pets my younglings keep at home. 2 arms, walking upright on those stubby little legs. Quite charming, really." Amy's face flushed red with anger as she heard the translation. Her hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to keep working at her console. Around the command center, other colonists exchanged angry glances, but Morrison raised his hand for silence. Veltar turned back to face the screen, his 4 eyes focusing on Morrison with the intensity of a hunter studying prey. "I will make this simple for your limited understanding, little creature. Your species will submit to Zephyrian authority immediately. We will relocate you to suitable habitats where you can be properly cared for and protected." "Protected from what?" Morrison asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "From yourselves, of course," Veltar replied with what might have been amusement. "Your kind is clearly too primitive and fragile to survive without guidance. Under our care, You will live comfortable lives in appropriate enclosures. Your basic needs will be met, and you will be safe from harm. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what the alien was really saying. They weren't being conquered in the traditional sense. They were being collected like animals for a zoo. "We appreciate your concern," Morrison said carefully, "but we prefer to remain free and independent. Perhaps we can discuss some form of mutual cooperation that benefits both our peoples." Veltar's expression changed to something that might have been pity. "Poor little thing. You don't understand the reality of your situation. Freedom is a concept for species capable of true civilization. You are like children who think they can live without adult supervision." Amy could barely contain her rage as she continued translating the conversation. The alien's condescending tone made her want to scream, but she knew that losing control now would only prove his point about human weakness. "We have survived the journey between stars and built a thriving colony on this world," Morrison said, his voice growing firmer. "We are not children, and we are not pets. We are human beings with the right to determine our own destiny." "How precious," Veltar replied. "The pets think they have rights." He leaned back in his command chair, clearly enjoying himself. "Very well, little ones. I am not without mercy. I will give you one rotation of your planet to consider my generous offer. Use this time wisely to prepare your people for relocation." The screen went dark, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Morrison looked around at the faces of his people, seeing fear, anger, and determination in equal measure. They had come so far and worked so hard to build their new home. Now, an alien commander was treating them like animals to be caged and displayed. Amy finally spoke, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Captain, we can't let them do this to us." Morrison nodded slowly, his mind already turning to their limited options. They had few weapons and no military experience compared to these aliens, but they had something else that Veltar clearly didn't understand or respect: the human refusal to surrender their freedom without a fight. "Get me Dr. Park and Sergeant Torres," Morrison said quietly. "We need to prepare for war."